Welcome to Coffee Chat, a podcast on investment banking recruitment brought to you by OfferGoblin. I'm Mike Neal. This is Ryan Tan, and we're the top investment banking coaches in the business. I'm the founder of OfferGoblin, which is a tool you'll probably use a lot if you're getting into investment banking. Today, the topic is artifacts, it's trackers, it's sort of the documentation and tools and things that you can use to kind of make this process work for you and make sense for you. Um, we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, Ryan, state of the street. What's going on? What are you hearing recruitment wise for investment banking right now?
Well, right now it's kind of the quiet season a bit in terms of from a structured recruiting process. So we're talking about your internships, right? That's always on the low line. But laterals are pretty hot at the moment. So there is always a demand for laterals, especially experienced laterals with good deal flow. So we'll see how things play out, but I'm definitely seeing a lot more demand being asked about laterals for positions to fill. And then when it comes to the fall recruiting cycle, we have the undergrads, they're starting to prepare for recruiting. MBAs hasn't really hit full season yet, but we still highly recommend to start earlier. Always start early. You can never be too early.
Yeah. I've had more and more MBAs reach out and I've been doing more and more sessions with MBAs. I think with people kind of, all the rounds are in, first, second, third round of MBA is in. I think people now know whether they're going to do an MBA and now they're kind of like, how do I get into banking? They're sort of starting to think about the next step. So we've got some of the early people reaching out to us. You can find the link in the bio to chat with us. And yeah, I think it's a wise thing to do. I think especially doing a story session, which I do a lot of these where essentially it's an hour and a half. We go through your story, the tell me about yourself, the why banking, that sort of thing. That's a really good thing to be doing now. Before we go into, the details, the minutia, Ryan, I was just telling you that I'm back to civilization. It doesn't really look like it. I'm still in a cabin in the woods, but I was actually in an even more remote place before this, believe it or not, uh, leading wilderness trips in northern Minnesota. So we did a big 6-day trip all along border lakes, some of the largest kind of lakes along the border, Crooked Lake, Basswood Lake, these kind of places probably mean nothing to most viewers here. But I'm back. We're recording, we're rolling. Um, and I see that your guest bed is without sheets, Ryan. You having guests over. What's going on?
No, this bed is just an empty room I use as my office. So nothing too exciting
No silk
here.
sheet, Ryan.
I don't think I know anyone with silk sheets. Maybe you have silk sheets, Mike, huh?
No, I'm in a sleeping bag, man.
I find it funny that you were an investment banker, you interned, and then you decide to go complete opposite and go live in a
I know.
hut, right?
I know. I honestly, I was dealing with some like I'm leading these trips and some of the problems that I'm dealing with, I'm like sitting and listening to someone tell me about sort of the, health problems they have because I have wilderness first aid, right? So I'm like
Mhm.
kind of taking care of people on the trip. And I was sitting there listening, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. And I was just thinking how 1 year ago I was in New York, and the conversations I was having were like, billion-dollar M&A transactions, and now I'm here. It's very surreal. I mean, I think a lot of things in my life have been very surreal. I've had a strange path that I've gone into different extremes, and I've always felt like that's the way to live, like to fully commit to very drastically different paths a lot of times. Part of the reason is that I had a formative experience where I did a very long hike, a 28-day hike in Colorado. And when I did that, I downloaded the discography of the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and Kanye West. And when I listened through that, you kind of hear the evolution of an artist, right? So you go from album to album and you kind of see how they like kind of figured out their voice, they figured out their style. But the thing that makes you follow an artist and the reason why we love artists is because they find something new to bring to it with each album. I think it's really pronounced with the Beatles, right? You go like they went, did their sort of trip into India and came back and did Sergeant Pepper's, which is very different from their more like sort of earlier polished work. And so I've always kind of found interest in putting myself in very drastically different and strange situations because I think that that's where really high alpha, interesting perspective comes from. Um, that said, I'm also kind of like I'm totally whiplashed by that. I don't mean to say that I'm not. So, um, but yeah, here I am. So, anyway, anything going on with you, man? What's new?
My life's pretty standard. It's we're busy with training for the summer, right? So there's
Yeah,
plenty of stuff to do with that.
yeah,
Then yeah, got the students I'm currently working with, prepping them for fall recruiting. Just
yeah.
same old stuff.
All right. Well,
I'm
let's
not
get
on any
into.
fun wilderness trips like you are.
Well, come out, man. You can come check it out. So let's talk about artifacts, right? I don't
Mhm,
know, and I don't know how you go about this, but I
mhm.
personally I'm a very structured person, so I like to have things documented. I like to have
Yes,
trackers. I like to have a plan. I tend to think in terms of spreadsheets a lot of times. When I'm looking at a
yes.
problem, I'm thinking about what are the columns of this problem? What are the rows of this column? And how can I like sort of structure the problem, even with very basic things? So I'm curious for you if there's any kind of like tools, sort of like standard documents that you make with candidates and how do those things work? How do they impact? Or do you think that's necessary? Maybe you don't.
Yeah, the networking tracker is definitely necessary. But I also think there's probably a better way to do it now, especially with all the tools with AI. But um, no, I'd say one of the biggest tools that I have since do is keep track of who you emailed, who you're going to email, where are things at with each stage. Did you follow up? Did you have the conversation? How many times you reached out? Um,
Yeah.
there's just unfortunately no way around it. I think if you're at a target school, it's easier. If you're at an MBA, it's even better because
Yeah.
the school does all the networking for you. But if you're non-target, oh man, there's just so much more effort you have to put in.
Right.
Um,
So
but
what
yeah,
does
no,
that
I kind of
tracker
with
look
you.
like? Do you have a template tracker that you use? I mean, maybe we'll put one up on OfferGoblin and link that, but
Yeah,
what
I have one where it's like your classic banker, email, what stage in the process. It's nothing too exciting. I mean, trackers themselves aren't really fancy, right?
right.
You don't need their phone numbers because you're not going to talk. I mean, there is a section for phone number if you want
Yeah.
to call them, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah. Sorry,
for
let
the
me close
most
the door.
part, sure,
I'm
sure, sure,
listening.
sure. Yeah. So for the most part, it's pretty straightforward in terms of um like you don't even need something fancier. There's something I just had over the years with banks listed in them.
Yeah.
So and
Yeah,
certain
I
email formats are kind of already guessed by the street.
yeah, yeah. I mean, essentially what you're describing is a CRM, right? If you're in
Yeah.
sales, which all of you are, the you need to keep track of like who you've talked to, what conversations you've had with them, like
Mhm.
when you need to follow up with them. I think there's like this and I see this you see this all the time in engineering.
Yeah.
There's like this belief that somehow you can like structure so well that you never have to think anymore. And I have just found that there is no structure that is universally going to give you that experience. You kind of always need to be thinking about it and always need to be reviewing it. Um, Ultimately, the structure gives you like a way of being organized about that, but there is not really going to be a clean way to automate that entirely, unfortunately. The other thing I would add, and I also did a people tracker, right? The first thing is
Mhm.
like just each row being a person, and then it's like what bank they're at, what's their level, if there's any notes about them, things like that. Um, the other thing is like I'm sure that I started with templates when I did that, but ultimately, like you kind of need to make it your own because it's
Yeah.
really a tool that's like specifically for you. I think there's a mistake a lot of times with just trying to build something that's universal, that's super robust. You're going to use ChatGPT and say, come up with this table, come up with that table. And ultimately, it's going to be just like what is useful for you. You might be a person that needs or wants to take a ton of notes, that has a ton of details per person. You might also just be someone that can like just jot down a couple things and it works for you. So there's no one size fits all, but certainly I think the first and the probably core, let's say tab or artifact is going to be the people tracker. So one other detail I guess about that is the way that I look at it is like you've got a few different types of like data that you need to keep track of, right? And I'm a tech person, so I'm going to explain this as like these are different tables, these are different data sets. The first one is people, right? And then you have conversations with those people. So each conversation, you could think of that as like a separate table where there's like a conversation per row. We might not put that in a table form. We might write those notes in a Google document, each one separate or whatever. But ultimately, that's another like sort of data type. And then the third type would be like sort of by the bank. So you could list out all the banks and like where am I with each of these banks? When is the due date for each of these banks? When is where are these banks? And sort of if you tie all those together, you can see like, okay, I can do a pivot table where I can see who I've talked to at each bank, or I can do a pivot table with like the notes that I have for like this entire bank or these five people or whatever. So I think that there's a lot of value in that. I think you pretty much have to do that because you'll have so many conversations that you just won't really be able to remember like you know what someone told you at the beginning or which bank said this or so I think it's really important to have that. Have you seen anyone kind of get through the process without really doing anything like that, or like what's the like extremes of that?
You could probably well, no, I had a tracker when I recruited for banking, but it wasn't as structured as it is now, but, I will say you could argue that this is just more reflective of people's nature, right? The type who succeeds and people who will succeed in getting through banking are those who cross their T's, dot their I's.
Yeah.
And I will say that having gone through banking and also training a wide range of people in teaching is that bankers might not tell you this, but like being disorganized and not being thorough and complete will drive them insane.
Yeah.
And it's probably also beat out of us from working in the industry from best practices, having things that are, yes, properly formatted, but also complete, right? Having a track record, being able to find it. I will say the simplest things that you could get be dinged in banking is not uploading things to the shared drive, not naming things properly, not having all the
Yeah.
information. And so it's kind of a reflective of like, somebody who would fit well into banking would somebody be really organized, have the tracker in place, and also be
Hmm.
thorough and detailed. Now, I do want to throw this back at you at a bit in terms of what have you seen in terms of the students? Because yes, it's like I would argue a lot of this thing is just like valuation itself, where a lot of it's both art and science. Is and I have my own thoughts. Is out of your students who have succeeded, and maybe your students don't need it as much because they're more MBA students,
Hmm.
but what are the characteristics of the kids that you've seen succeed when it comes to artifacts, how they use it, as well as perhaps how they personalize it?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think that a lot of those people are very thorough, as you talk about. I remember we would have networking events, and you'd have people run out in the hallway and kind of like drastically writing down like all the things that they heard from an MD that they just talked to. They write the best thank you notes, right? Because they remember the conversation that they had. They remember the high notes, the emotional notes that they can bring up later again. I think those people do well. I don't think that it's impossible to not really, let's say, keep track of those things. There's some people that are very good people persons.
Okay.
I met a staffer who was a former staffer for Nancy Pelosi, and they said that she never really needed notes on people, and she met tons of
Yeah.
people, and seem to always know their name. So it is very possible that you can do that. But as Ryan said, it's like if you're doing that, it's not because you're being lazy, it's because like you actually are able to like lock in and do that. So don't, I would say think about it as we talked about the formula for power earlier on, right? Energy. You need to output energy, whether that means that you're outputting energy in the form of memorizing these things and like putting it down and then like you're talking to more people because you're not taking as many notes, but whatever it takes, like, you need to put a lot of energy into these things, and that will be noted. So, um, I think that I can't remember exactly, but I think maybe with Booth, they gave us, like, an initial sort of template, or they maybe defined, like, here's an initial way of sort of tracking CRM, but everyone does it. Like, everybody I don't think anyone didn't do it that I know of. So that's a really good starting point.
Yeah.
Um, anything else on, like, the CRM topic? I feel like it's kind of very personal to people, so I don't know if you have any other
It's
things to
definitely
add.
very personal to people. I would say another way to think of it is I honestly think it's a great way for just for how to do business and grow as a person in general. So I
Yeah,
think when you're young, you don't think of the idea of networking or how to nobody teaches you how to properly network.
yeah,
And I think one of the things is sometimes networking has a bad stigma attached to it because it sounds very transactional.
right,
I like to have tell people to think of it as, and I wish I knew this better, and I'm still trying to learn and be better at it. It's like I think there was like John Rockefeller is like one of the richest people in history and he had great relationships. Is he would used to carry these cards of all the people he met and he
mm,
would write down notes about them, whether they're kids, their parents, their families, or what the conversation was about. And before he met anyone again, he'd take a time to review and note that.
mm,
And it was
mm,
very, you know, sure you could say it's doing business, or you can also argue it just shows that you care more than the next person.
right,
But how you end up interacting, and then do you still follow up? Do you remember the small details? Just makes the other person feel that you're putting in more of a personal touch.
right,
And it's one of those things I think we can all do a bit better is I will be more impressed and I think I guess cared for if somebody just remembers, small details, right?
yeah,
And it's one thing I've kind of tried to do better, partially because of old age, not because of being young, is if I don't write down anything about another person, I just don't remember where I spoke to them and how. And so
yeah,
for me personally, if I meet somebody new, like yesterday, I was having a conversation with a student or one of the student's friends that was very random. And then it was a good conversation, an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then we talked everything from like how airlines are secretly bank models to how um, ethics and philosophy to it was like so random. And then so I'm like,
yeah,
great conversation, but if I don't write down any notes about this person, I'm not gonna see this name. I'm just gonna blank. So
yeah,
I think it's a great skill set in just general for those. And it's a reason why I think banking makes you do this because at the end of the day, the MDs at the very top, they make the deal and have the relationship not because they presented a cleaner Excel DCF than the next guy, right?
right,
It's
right,
because they have the relationship. So
yeah.
that's all I have for CRMs.
Yeah, no, I think that that's pretty thorough. Well, here's another one that I do, and I don't know if you do this, but
Mhm.
so for the like, tell me about yourself, why banking, and if it's like a group, like if you're doing tech, like why tech, let's say, or why Guggenheim, right? I like to keep a spreadsheet, and this is another tab on the one that we just discussed. This is
Yeah.
another tab that is basically like those items and kind of written out. And the part of the reason that I do that is that the way that I approach each one of those questions
Mhm.
is has a structure to it. So
Yeah.
the answer is, like, very structured, like, there's, like, a either it's, like, a standard, like, claim, reason, evidence, impact structure, or for
Mhm.
the, like, tell me about yourself, it's like a hero's journey, and so, like, I have a line for each sort of note of that story, and I have found that to be really helpful because the other thing is, and this is also as I work with clients, this is something that I usually make for them. And then as they go along and as you go along and you're saying it more, you'll kind of naturally refine it because
Yeah.
you'll say certain sentences in a different way and you'll say, "Oh, that was actually a little smoother when I said it like this," or like, "Yeah, this
Mhm.
part was actually kind of choppy," and that sort of thing. Part of the reason that I like the structure to it is that it kind of keeps you a little more concise because
Yeah.
you want to have this sort of like rhythm to it where it's like boom, 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 boom. And they can tell that you're kind of, the plot is always advancing, right? You think about
Yeah.
good writing in a show, in a movie, whatever. When people are talking, there's always something that's like hooking you into the next thing that they're saying. They're not kind of filling the space with stuff you don't really care about. So
Yeah.
we've talked about this probably at length, but like, for example, for someone's story, you don't need to explain why you didn't get into the NBA. You don't need to explain why, like, you had this weird experience where, you were going to be a chef and then you went into chef school and you dropped it. Like, you don't need to get into like every
Yeah.
single detail of that story. There's like this like rhythm that that story needs to have where like everything advances the plot. So for me, I like that, like, kind of document, but I'm curious how do you track or document that, like, tell me about yourself or those types of questions that are, like, just recurring questions?
So, and I guess this kind of touches the artifact a bit is, and I'm going to shoot this question a bit back to is when you have people network with others, how much do you have your students sort of research um their who they're talking with, and based off
Yeah.
that, how do you change their answers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I prefer them to at least look the person up on LinkedIn, and I think usually the skew is more in the questions section of the prep, so the types of questions that they would ask. I don't usually have them change, like, their tell me about themselves and the other details because when you think of, like, media training, right, what they would tell you in
Yeah.
media training is, like, you need to have one message that's consistent that basically you just repeat over and over and over again. So even though it's a little monotonous, like you telling the same story to everyone in a group at the bank, they'll remember you for some specific detail of that story which stands out to them, and that's what you'll be known as. You'll be, "Oh, that's the data center kid. That's the kid that, was a college swimmer. That's the kid that was XYZ." You wanna have that, like, consistent identity so that they kinda remember you and they kinda have, like, a sense of, like, who you are. If
Yeah.
you change that, my caution would be, like, if you change that story too much across, like, different people that you're talking to, you won't have a consistent sort of personal brand or identity at that
Yeah.
bank, and then that will cause you, like, some harm. So, I would put it as, there maybe are some details that you can skip through or, like, say in a little bit lighter of a way depending on the level and depending on how, like, bored the person seems, but most of the customization, I would say, happens in the questions section of the coffee chat, the questions that you ask them.
So yeah, no, I agree with you is that you don't wanna have, like, 50 different identities at a single bank.
Mhm.
But I guess where I'm sort of do this a bit differently in terms of is that if you're talking to a different bank or a different group, their chances are the bankers are not gonna talk to each other, and so there's not gonna be overlap.
Sure.
So, for example, if you're doing a wide net, right? I have some kids that recruit for different groups. Some are doing energy and tech. And so I will have a different resume. I will also try to have your tell me about yourself and your experience slightly different.
Mm.
I will also do things that depending on your I would have you stalk the the hell out of them before you coffee chat with them to understand are there something mutual that you've done? Were you in the same club together? Right? Did this
Yeah.
person do you do a sport like were you both in varsity water polo? Right?
Right.
Just things to try to um build some like commonality, I'm of course, you're not gonna overemphasize it, right? If you find somebody who was also in varsity water polo, you're not gonna be, like, talking half the time about how you're in varsity water, but you might slightly drop it in. "Hi, I'm John. I'm a
Um,
sophomore at Georgetown. I'm a student athlete. I play on the water polo team," and then I started,
yeah,
right? Some things
yeah,
that
yeah,
just do a small drop. So I
right,
do have people tailor it a bit, or I also have people tailor it in their networking email, just to make it
yeah.
easier for someone to build camaraderie, um, and pick up that call, or at least be on your side. So,
Yeah, I will say with well, if they're going for different groups, then definitely that
mhm,
changes, right? Because then not only
yeah,
is there like Y tech versus Y industrials, but there's also like within the story, you couldn't there's honestly, a lot of the story I think is more focused on being a banker than it is about,
yeah,
let's say, tech or the other thing. And the reason for that is that you really need to sell the idea that you want to be a banker. It's not that you want to be a tech person. It's not that you want to be an industrials person. You want to be a banker. But the area that you want to focus on is tech, is industrial. So the
yeah.
tell me about yourself doesn't change too much for me. It could change if it's like, let's say they're going for like M&A versus like restructuring or like a commercial
Yeah,
bankroll. Like that would change it a little bit. But like the other thing is I try not to change like, I would try to have that change just, let's say, like, one row of that story, like, one beat of that story, because if you start
mhm,
changing up the whole story, they're gonna lose track of, like, the rhythm of the story and, like, what
yeah,
needs to be different, and then they're gonna try to memorize all these different stories. You really wanna make it easy on yourself to kinda get through the process and, like, recite these
mhm,
things. Um, the other thing is, yeah, definitely for networking emails, you wanna, like, try to create that connection as, like, well as possible. I don't think it would
yeah,
hurt, like, if you knew that they were, like, a water polo player and you were a water polo player, I
mhm,
don't think that it would I think that it would be smart when you're in the "tell me about yourself" to be like, "Oh, and I played water polo, which I saw that
mhm,
you also do. It would be great to chat about that, but anyway," and continuing on,
yeah,
planting the seed of that connection and kinda then going from there. I also
mhm,
think that sometimes, I mean, a lot of people I know that have done very well, they've had coffee chats that completely go away from talking about banking or any other
yeah,
sort of topic. And there was an MD, it was actually the global head of M&A at JP Morgan. I can't remember his name, but
mhm,
he was saying that he could have a conversation with a candidate about any topic and he would be able to get a sense of like who they were, right? He could talk to them
yeah,
about golf and you could get a sense of who they were. Because also, if you talk to someone about golf, right, and they're if you were to talk to me about golf, I'm not a big golfer, but if I were, I would talk a lot about the types of material that a golf club is and like the different types of wedges and how I'm like looking at different types of wedges and comparing them and how um I think about the elevation and what I love about golf is like it makes you think more about elevation than any other sport probably does, besides maybe running. And so I think that if you had that conversation, you'd get a sense of how I think, even though like someone else could talk about golf and say, "Oh yeah, I have a great time. I go with my friends. We, do this or that," which isn't wrong, but the idea being that you could talk about something that's totally tangential or whatever, and you could still get a lot of detail out of that person. So, if I were in your position and they were themselves steering the conversation away from finance and serious stuff, I would just let them do that. I wouldn't try to, like, pull it back.
of
Um,
course, when the guys yeah, definitely.
yeah, and they're also, like, burned out, like, so, like, it's kinda nice, like, they probably, enjoy if they love scuba diving, they probably enjoy talking to you about it. Um, so I don't know if we got a clean answer. Do you keep a document for them for the tell me about yourself? How do you actually record like, what that is? Or do you take bullet points? How does that appear in the world?
So for the tell me about so I do a lot of prep with my students before their coffee chats, right? And then so I like to tell them to think of it as in main themes, right? Maybe is here are the things that you want to get across the structure. And so and also it goes back to the wholesale is who's your audience,
Mhm.
right? So if they're talking to a tech banker, research everything all about it. make it feel that yes, you're talking about yourself, but you're actually not really talking about yourself. You're talking about how you could where your skill set, your background would be a good fit for their team, is what
Yeah.
I wanna think of it. And so then I like to tell people in terms of your resume for the most part, all the heavy work is done early on, right? Think
Mhm.
of your resume as like, here's a list of valuable experiences, and it's kind of like a bank, right? And so you don't have to talk about everything on your resume, right? Pick and choose the things that are relevant and that you feel that are relevant that that guy would be interested in,
Mhm.
and pull those out, emphasize them a bit more, and have him decide where he wants to go. If he wants to ask about something that you didn't emphasize too much on it, let him do that, right?
Right.
So it's it's a very I like to tailor it a bit more, but I don't think of it as like I think of it as things in modules, right? And
Yeah.
so and maybe that's a bit engineering. It's I find it really funny when the answers you give, I'm just like, of course you would say the elevation and stuff. It's spoken like, what you are the you were a mechanical engineer by training, or I don't
Civil.
remember. Civil, of course, civil engineer. Spoken like a
Yeah.
true civil engineer.
Well, I was just golfing yesterday, and, like, when you hit the ball, you're really thinking about elevation a lot because you're kinda like, "Okay, I need to try to get it up over this mound, or it's gonna, you know, like, land short and roll all the way down." So there's a lot of
Mhm.
I think that it's very interesting, and the sort of landscaping and leveling that they do to create those is interesting. But,
Yeah.
I think we'll probably have to end up doing a full episode on the resume. Maybe that is the next episode that we do. But we do have a resume template on Offer Goblin. We'll link that in the description so you can go check that out. But I agree. I think all of these things that you're doing, everything that you're doing in these conversations is you're giving them a taste and you're kind of letting them decide where they want to drill in deeper. It's a mistake to come in and try to force the conversation in the direction that you want or that you think is important or relevant. And that includes when they ask, like, walk me through your resume. What they're asking for is an overview. They're not asking for every single detail. They don't need to know like every single in and out of everything that you've done. What they want is a catalog of like, okay, here are the types of like questions that you can ask me about, and then let them guide and you follow up and all of that. So everything that you're doing is kind of that. That's why you speak in a concise fashion so that they can kind of find those endpoints that they're interested in and drill down. Um, yeah, I keep those kind of tracked. Another one that I keep tracked. And again, I'm curious for all of these things that you do them because I think we have a bit of a different style, but I think it works.
Yeah.
The stories. So your stories of like tell me about a time when you were a leader. Tell me about a time when you failed. Tell me about a time when you helped a teammate out, something like that. I keep all of those in a spreadsheet as well. I think that the spreadsheet is like the row is the story, or I might do it in the other way. I might do it where the column is the story and then the rows are like the star method, STAR, and then the punchline. And that I think is something that I've not seen other people do. That punchline is so important because each story should have a one sentence like landing spot. And you can tell the whole story. And as long as you know that you can hit that punchline at the end, it gives you a way to close the story out and like stop talking on a dime. So if that story starts to get boring, you just kind of land on that punchline and then you just stop, you know. So but I'm curious, how do you help people organize their stories?
Behavioral.
Yeah, behavioral stories.
I think so. I think this goes maybe back to my philosophy of just doing things in general in terms of work backwards from the end is
Mhm.
when you're answering a behavioral, what exactly are you trying to get across, right?
Mhm.
So every behavioral has a question in terms of what are the qualities that are looking for? And are those the qualities that I can envision a good investment banking analyst? For example, are
Mhm.
you proactive? Do you have attention to detail? Are you a good team player? And are you a For example, are you naturally curious? Do you take responsibility, etc.? So you get a
Right.
sense of who you want as a summer analyst. And so, okay, if you know that's what they're looking for, you need to showcase that. Right. So then go back to the whole bank idea is there's this bank of qualities and attributes that you have, right? So these are the things you have to show. On the other point, then you need a bank of experiences where you could tell the story, right?
Yeah.
And then on those experiences, you have to focus on the action and result. I think where the things that I see people mess up the most is like your answer shouldn't be like 10 minutes. Your answer shouldn't even be 5. But I see people, they do the STAR method,
Yeah.
but they focus everything on the situation and the task.
Right.
And you have to realize that if I've worked 100 hours a week, my attention span after I ask a question is probably maybe 30 seconds at best. And if you're droning on and on and on about your situation and task, I'm already lost. Right,
Right.
and that doesn't tell me anything about you, right?
Right.
Your
Right.
action and the results. So I would say, you know, get straight to the point. You could list out the situation, list out the task. What I'm really trying to assess is your action, right? And what resulted of your action. And then
Mhm.
the things when it comes from the result of your action, people like to make it like it's like happily ever after. It's like the princess kissed the bride, and then Sleeping Beauty awoke, and thus happily ever. I'm like, that's complete BS in your answer, right? Make your results be more thoughtful, right? Be more
Yeah.
genuine. And it's like, right, people will say, okay, we delivered the presentation, hit the deadline in time, and the client was happy. I'm like, so
Right.
BS. That doesn't tell me anything
Yeah.
about you.
I agree. That's a very weak ending. Yeah,
So, yeah. Hmm.
I think you're spot on about the rambling part. I think that the S and the T are sort of the least important parts. The A
Yeah.
and the R are where you should really like you really want to get through the S and the T because it's expository. It's essentially just
Yeah.
explaining the scene. And you can think of the responses that you give in any interview, but especially this type of question. You could think of it as like a short form, any in the same way you think of short form content, right? The first things
Yeah.
that you say should hook them in. The situation needs to be like interesting in some way, or you need to frame it up in a way that's interesting. Like,
Mhm.
well, I could tell you about the time when I almost lost my head, or like, I mean, that's a little too dramatic. I don't think that would make the cut. But let's say I could tell you about the time when we almost lost $1 billion of my previous firm. It's like,
Eh,
they're gonna listen to that, right? I mean, you don't wanna make it, overly dramatic, let's say, but that's the type of first statement that they're gonna be like, "Wait, what?" And they're gonna listen. So, I think you want that first, S and T, really the S part, to be very, to be very interesting, make it interesting. Um, and then the punchline piece, I think, Ryan, you're spot on. The results need to be sort of tangible and real, and they need to be something that
yeah.
like a person could understand. Preferably, those are numerical or they're like they involve like a very like I guess a real human outcome, I would say. Like, oh, and the person like we finally were able to finish this, and I remember like my MD was able to go home and go to bed after like 48 hours or whatever. Like that's almost, that's something that's like sort of real and people can understand. The
Yeah.
punchline piece is like, what's the lesson learned? And it's like, what did you take
Exactly.
away from this? What's different now? And I think a lot of people will stop at results, but if you throw in a punchline, if you throw in like what you've learned from it, I think that's a lot better. I don't want to get too into the minutia of this one because I think again we'll probably do a full episode on this type of topic.
Yeah.
But how do you actually recruit? So do you have the students like write down these stories and like keep them in a Word document, or like how do they actually like keep track of these stories?
So I will say it really depends on the level of engagement of my student. Right.
Hmm.
So I have two types of students. I have one student
Yeah.
who kind of just hit me up ad hoc basis.
Mhm.
Right. And then those students they kind of like want quick answers. They're not looking for which they kind of view it as like, oh, this is expensive and I don't want to do this. Right. And so those, you kind of give them advice and then they kind of take it or leave it, right?
Right.
Then I have students who are more like where I guess it's more not ad hoc, but it's like a long-term relationship and engagement.
Mm,
And those are the ones where, you're not watching the clock. And those are the ones where I really take the time and we allow to sort of fully explore, right?
yeah.
Where I'm asking, okay, and where I also understand the student's nature and character better. And I will help them basically say, well, I will ask about qualities that I would probably look for as a associate overseeing a summer analyst.
Mhm.
And then we might pick, okay, I think this is an important trait, an important quality. For example, okay, yes, and it also you have to see on who's your audience, right? So for example,
Yeah.
if you're like I think humility is completely under sort of underestimated or like not given its full due of respect. So I was like, did you
Mm,
learn anything? Also, it's okay to
yeah.
screw up. Did you grow from it? Okay, how do you tell that? All right, what did you exactly learn? And I think this is also another problem that probably deserves its own subsection. But unfortunately, with recruiting so early and so with people so young is even with kids at target schools that are brilliant, you kind of unfortunately you don't see much humility. It's almost like, oh, they think I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. I deserve this job, whatever. And you're like,
Yeah.
I really wouldn't want to work with you if I hired you.
Right. Right.
So, um, but so I will dive pretty deeply. I would want to know everything, and it's a trusted relationship where I need you to tell me things. Right? It's better that like it's nice if you tell me all the good news, but I always tell folks, and also I told my analysts and summer analysts when I manage them too. It's like it's great to hear good news, but it's the bad news that I really know, so then I can help like address the worst case scenario and then how you manage if it shows up in your area. So I dive pretty deep, and I know that was a long tangent away from what we were talking for.
No, it's good. And I think you're right. Like humility, I think humility is always this like I want I'm not positive about this, but I believe the word like the root of the word humility in Greek means like fertile land or something or like fertile soil. You can fact check me on that. I'm sure the viewers you can comment if I'm wrong, but I think that if you think about it, humility is really the cornerstone of all other learning, right? That's why people, in Christian faith, pride is the core is the cardinal sin, right? Because pride, which is anti-humility, is the thing that's going to prevent you from just sort of going and doing the thing, just going and like recognizing that you don't understand and trying to learn and attempting to learn versus like coming in and pretending like you do and then fail and then kind of either failing or just not doing it at all. So it really is like humility is a core attribute to success everywhere. So, here's another. I was kind of just going through the tabs on like a client that I worked with. I build everything in spreadsheets pretty much, and so there's a bunch of tabs. Another tab is the what I call the market cluster, which we'll talk about more at length in another episode again. But the deal, sort of your deal, your trend, and like the companies that you're following,
Yeah.
that's something where I like to keep that very structured
Mhm.
because, like, it's important that you follow a set of companies, and
Yeah.
those companies, there should be a deal those that, like, happen between 2 of those companies. You should know all the details about that deal, which again is a very structured thing. You need to
Mhm.
know just, like, let's say um, the value of the deal, the consideration, you need to know the dates, all those sorts of facts. And then the last one is the trend. And so like having a structured way of explaining a trend and like who benefits and who has headwinds from that trend is uh like another sort of like key artifact that I like to build out with clients that I think helps a lot. how do you approach do you have sort of a sheet or types of documentations that you use for that sort of thing? Or, like, how do you go about that?
So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this too. So deals and trends are very important. What I
Mhm.
actually do is I probably have them do a bit more, and this also probably also goes to the fact that I have them start earlier,
Yeah.
is I will have them write deal memos and
Yeah.
also industry trend memos,
Mm.
and then they could put it all in one Word doc, right? And
Yeah.
and I guess philosophically where this is probably the teacher in me coming in is I also want them to understand and learn as opposed to just passing a test.
Yeah.
Yes, the prep, understand what the client needs, and yeah, you could argue that's basically for passing a test. But like
Yeah.
also at the end of the day is I structure that and combine that with self-discovery. So I really want them to understand why deals are certain done because in having been in banking for so long is you see what half the kids drop out within a year. Um It's just and then the other half is miserable, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that. There's a lot
So
of
everyone
things. Sorry?
that adds up to 100%. So you either leave or you're miserable, basically, you're saying.
I sometimes joke that I have not seen a happy banker. Well, I don't know if that's a joke. I think a happy banker is an oxymoron. Uh,
Yeah.
so so this is where I really emphasize in teaching in terms of I like to tell a lot of stories and I like to talk a lot of jokes when I teach. And I like to
Mhm.
pull a lot of interesting deals that unfortunately schools just don't teach finance in an interesting way. For example, like specific mergers, right? Or specific situations where that doesn't make sense. And unless you've been following them or know them historically, um,
Yeah.
you just won't get wind of. And I think what was I'm trying to think of? There's one sin I was prepping them for maybe oh yeah. So I think I was prepping a student for shareholder activism and defense coffee chat. It's one of those
Yeah.
rare, like esoteric groups.
Yeah.
And so there are two things I brought up as like the poison pill defense, which
Yeah.
no freshman would know about that. And then I don't know if you're familiar with the poison pill defense, Mike. Um, if
Is it like a basically a certain set of shares that can be, like, used in a situation of a hostile takeover or something like
yeah,
that? Or is it that they
right.
buy
So
up a
prevent
bunch of debt? Yeah, I forget what yeah, what is it exactly?
so this is the one it's like the poison pill, it's like you basically dilute the shares that somebody is like in a hostile takeover, right?
Got it. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so where I tell folks is like people will have heard the poison pill defense. Well, maybe not freshman undergrads, but then have you ever heard of the Pac-Man defense?
That must be, eating a fruit and then, like, gobbling up a bunch of ghosts. Is that
So it's based off of that, right? But where it's actually pretty cool is the Pac-Man defense is let's say somebody's trying to take over your company hostilely, and instead of them taking over, you take them over instead, right?
Oh,
So it's basically like a reverse Uno card, right? Just like Pac-Man,
yeah.
they eats the medicine, and then
Mm.
and so these are things I try to do with like I will like have them do the deals, but I will like have them try to know things that are a bit more interesting. And so then I think like some examples of Pac-Man defense was like Porsche and Volkswagen. So I think Porsche tried to
Yeah.
take over Volkswagen and then Volkswagen ended up buying Porsche instead.
Nice.
So stuff like
Yeah.
that. That
No, I think that's very true. I think that that's one of the reasons I enjoy the session that I have with people where we do a bunch of research on deals and trends is because some of the times it's a deal that I don't know a ton about, but we kind of get inside on what is interesting about this deal. And once
yeah,
you sort of discover what that thing is, because I mean, and some deals are very rudimentary, but there's usually something about a deal that kind of sparkles or that's sort of weird or unusual
yeah,
that it's fun to find that thing and to wonder like, yeah, why did they do that? Why did they use this weird structure? Why did they have so much earnout? Why do they have this sort of like IP clause. I'm like, what are these about? So I think that documenting that in the like in this sort of like structured way, the structure that I'm
Yeah.
describing and the tab that I'm describing is really more about how you're going to sort of recite the deal and the trend because like you have to present
Yes,
it.
I agree.
But then I usually will have like a research report that I'll do from like Gemini or Claude, usually from all three, like Claude, Gemini, and
Yeah.
ChatGPT. And then like we'll also kind of read through that of like, here's the research report that gives like additional details as well. So
Mhm.
those are all things that you can uh I think not I mean you can do on your own. You can hire a coach like one of us to help you with again, link in the description if you want to meet with us. Um the the main thing is to get to is like two pieces, two sides of that, just to summarize this. The one
Yeah.
side is being able to like rattle off the facts of the deal. The deal happened on
Yes.
March 3rd, 2025. It was a $16 billion deal. It was 50% cash, 50% stock, and XYZ, right? You have to
Yeah.
just state those things. But then you're going to get into a conversation after where there's like just an unstructured discussion about aspects of the deal. And that's where you're going to want to have this sort of memo that Ryan talks about, or like a research report, or some other things where you've like actually engaged with this so you can go kind of further into a conversation. I want to see. I think there's maybe like one other thing that I had. Oh, another. Okay, here. Yeah, here's another tab that I think is really useful for people is FAQs, and those are FAQs that you're
Yes.
gonna get. So
Mhm.
certain candidates, just depending on who they are. Let's say you have a low GPA, you're going to get asked, "Why do you have a low GPA?" Let's say you switch majors. You're going to get asked, why did you switch majors? These are all things that you should basically have written down in advance where you just know like what you're going to say in response to these questions. So I like to keep an FAQ page and just have those like ready to go for people. Um, and you'll also get a sense, like, as you go along in the process, you'll just get a sense of what those are because 'cause you'll just hear the same question multiple times, and you're like, "Oh, people keep asking me why I'm a dual degree student. I'm gonna put that on here and kind of be ready for it." So, that's another one that I think is interesting. How do you think about that, Ryan? Do you kinda just work through it with them, or do you kinda document it out, or
Well, so I think one of the things I also do with FAQs too is I also grill them myself, right?
Yeah,
In terms of like, and this starts with a very preliminary part, right? And I'm just going to be, and then I think sometimes it depends, right? Like maybe sometimes I'm too blunt with some of my students in terms of I will just be like, what's wrong here, right? Because you get used to these, right? You've seen somebody resume and you're just like, these are the questions they're going to ask, and there's no way to hide. And then I will also like just call them out in
yeah,
terms of like, why are you only here for a year, right?
right,
And then I like to think of it as it depends on where you come looking for us, and this is where I think coaches are just critical in general for everything we've spoken about. Is a good coach will also be anticipatory instead of reactive. Is from designing your story at the very beginning and from writing your resume, you should have your story and your resume designed such that unnecessary questions don't get asked, whether
right,
it's in coffee chats
yeah,
or in your interviews. Like, if you have like irrelevant experience, for example, that was like an internship from high school, don't put it in there. Right? Like,
right,
you don't need the guy asking, it's like, I see you were originally going to be a professional basketball player. Why did you suddenly switch?
yeah.
Right? I mean, just like,
I was thinking more like,
it's
why
like,
did you work at this ice cream shop, like, when you're a senior in high school or something, like
yeah.
yeah, stuff that's just not
So,
yeah,
so yeah, so the FAQs, there's a lot of prep work done at the beginning to sort of, and then you synthesize, get to the part is like, okay, there are things that you can't just run, you can't run away from.
Right.
Like, and like if you have a shitty GPA, is this is also going to be like if your GPA is 2.8, there's just nothing I can do about that, right? You just gotta
Yeah.
like I
You need
might
an
say,
answer.
okay, is your major GPA higher, or is there ways you've got to boost that up, right?
Yeah.
Um,
But
but other
you
things,
need a
it's like,
story around that. I mean, you're gonna get a question. There's no way they're not if you get through, there's no way they're not gonna ask you, "Why is this so low?" And you need to have, you
yeah,
know, an answer, right?
that definitely. But I would say probably the more common FAQs would be like if you're based out of Houston, like maybe if you're based out of New York, why are you recruiting for Houston? Right, that's going to be a question that they're gonna ask you, right? There's or like
Yeah.
if you're interviewing for Minnesota, you're not gonna get out of that. And those are the things where, as well as just having a coach like Mike or me being able to anticipate what questions, because we've seen it too many times, right? And also we've asked it on the other end when you're looking.
Yeah.
And so we'll get those answers prepared. Yes, you have a spreadsheet. Yes, you'll have those, but if you've been prepared well, you shouldn't have any like dangerous curveball FAQs where you're spending half the time answering. You
Mhm.
you would have avoided those landmines from the beginning.
Yeah. No, that's definitely the right way to go about it, is, like, you wanna always try to avoid. I mean, it's like Mad Men, right? You've seen Mad Men when they talk about cigarette marketing, and they're like, "Oh, how are we supposed to get over the fact that it's, like, causes cancer and, like, everyone's talking about this?" So instead of saying, like, "Oh, this is a healthier cigarette," let's say, because they were advertising, I think it was, like, Lucky Strike, and it's, like, supposedly a little bit healthier. What they
Oh,
said
yes, they're
instead.
saying it's less dangerous, right?
Right. So what they said
But
instead
how
was
is it?
it's toasted. And of course, all
Ah,
tobacco
yes,
is
yes, yes.
toasted, right? But they're just changing the conversation to be about what they want to talk about. And that's how you need to do it, right? If your GPA is not strong, you should definitely not lead the conversation into that. Like, yes, you should have FAQ ready in case that happens, but ideally, you're skewing them into pockets of conversation that are going to be beneficial for you to have and not you having to defend your background or XYZ. That's the real mastery. That's the real judo throw of this. So that would be the angle.
I agree. No, definitely.
Yeah. So we're going to start wrapping it up here. This has been another episode of Coffee Chat. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. We love to get your questions and comments. Things are starting to roll along as we've gotten this going. If there's things you love about the show, things you don't like, feel free to reach out. You can reach out through the link in the bio. You can also, like, get in touch with us. Like, we'll get on calls with you and stuff. Um, and yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.
Have a good one. Take care.